lay out overnight, all that night, you see, and all ready to start off in the morning. And in those days, they had what they call the creeping barrage, because you were supported by artillery, you see.
And then 5 minutes before the actual time of going over, which was the worst for the troops, that's when their feelings might break and that sort of thing. You would say 5 minutes to go, and you'd shout it down the left and right of your sector. And 4 minutes, and 3 minutes, and 2 minutes, and half a minute. And then you'd say 10 seconds. Get ready. Over.
And we went over in the rain. Well, there was a Mark IV tank to start with. That got stuck. So it stuck there, no one in it. And why I tell you this, because it was under fire from the tower of a church. Low down, that Jerry held, you see. And we had to watch. We had to watch it. It was raining, and men were slipping about and getting up.
There was a mass of our fellows had been caught by low exploding shrapnel, and they'd been absolutely slaughtered. It was the first time I'd smelt human blood fresh, and it's the most horrible smell I've ever smelt. But they were lying there all over the place, just mutilated. We just had to keep going on. And it's just as well we did, because it could have unnerved us if you'd have been too long in that place. I've never forgotten it.
There was trees up there, but there was only the trunks that were standing. There were no branches or something on them. They just stood there, you see. They had all the branches had cut off of them, and there weren't nothing. Just a wilderness.
After 3 years of fighting, the area around Ypres had been pulverised by artillery fire. Nothing remained. Irrigation systems had been smashed. When it rained, the area turned into a sea of mud, with the consistency of porridge.
There were cases where 1 or 2 men slipped off the duckboards, and it took a couple of their comrades to pull them out gradually, inch by inch. That's why they laid the dead across the duckboards. So if they'd let them put them on the side off the duckboards, they'd have been sucked into the mud.
Men, guns and tanks sank in the mud, which made launching any sort of attack almost impossible.
We were stumbling into deep holes full of water, and the noise we made dragging our bodies through the mud caused flares to shoot up all along his line, and the ground was swept by traversing guns.
I don't think our leading troops got more than 50 yards. We simply stuck in the mud, and anybody carrying a Lewis gun or any heavy weight like that simply couldn't get on. It was beyond his strength.
It was recorded at the time that one of the staff officers from General Staff went to the battlefield of Passchendaele, and he exclaimed, "Good God, we never sent men to do this."
Once out of the trenches, soldiers pushed towards their objectives, often under heavy fire.
As we got up from Canal Bank to make our advance, then the barrage started then. We went through some light 18-pounders on the way up over the ridge, and they were belting away as hard as they could. But forward we went. There were some casualties, but we finally reached our destination, and we landed up in a shell hole or two and gradually got into a position where we could defend whatever we had gained.
It wasn't just the infantry and artillery fighting Ypres. The Allies also used tanks, but they could be just as vulnerable to enemy fire.
And we're sailing along now, and all of a sudden There was a tremendous thump right in the belly of the tank. Outside, you see, and the tremendous shell had hit our tank, and the place was full of smoke, gas and everything else. But the shell didn't come through. If that had gone through, we shouldn't have been here now.
For some, the battlefield experience was too much, and they lost their nerve.
Well, this boy had just joined the company. He was younger than me, and he suddenly collapsed and said that he couldn't go on. And so I said sternly to him, "You get up and go on. If you go on, you may well not be shot, but if you lie here or go back, you will be shot for a certainty." He pulled himself together and he got through.
New weaponry and unprecedented firepower inflicted horrendous injuries on vast numbers of soldiers. A system of treatment was developed, but first a casualty had to make it safely off the battlefield.
They lay groaning and blaspheming. We lied to them all that stretcher bearers were coming, and most resigned themselves to a further agony of waiting. Some cursed us for leaving them, and one poor fellow clutched my leg and screamed, "Leave me, would you?"
Stretcher bearers risked their own lives to retrieve the wounded, who would then be treated at dressing stations set up in abandoned buildings, pillboxes and shell holes just behind the lines, and still within range of enemy guns.
We loaded a horse ambulance with our stretcher cases. Now I hate to tell this actually, because I have had bad times. But I saw the ambulance disappear into a creche. The lot. Men, horses, and bone fell away.
Sometimes, sheer weight of numbers threatened to undermine even these efforts.
These medical officers neither eat nor sleep. After 5 hours, we had 3/4 of them out of their blood-soaked clothes, dressed, fed, hemorrhage stopped, hands and faces washed, and some asleep. 2 died, and more were dying.
Those in need of further treatment were transported to casualty clearing stations, and then, if necessary, to base hospitals away from the front, or back in Britain. Others might simply be patched up and made ready once again to be called into battle. The efficient transport of men and equipment was crucial to an army's survival. Soldiers and supplies travelled overseas to be uploaded at ports and then transported by road and rail to the front. Manning this complex system was the often overlooked Labour Corps. These men built and repaired railways, canals and communication lines, and as the army's demands grew, labourers were recruited from as far afield as South Africa and China. In spite of their desperate need for fighting men, the British Army shamefully refused to allow black men from Africa or the West Indies to serve in combat roles on the Western Front. In 1915, the British West Indies Regiment was formed in response to huge enthusiasm to take an active role in the war. But though they saw military action in the Middle East, Africa, and on the Western Front, these eager and able volunteers were absorbed into the Labour Corps, carrying out tasks such as moving shells, as we see here. By the end of the war, about 300,000 men from Egypt, South Africa, India, and China were working in the Labour Corps in France and the Middle East. But even in these important non-combat roles, men were not immune from the dangers of enemy action or the difficulties of military life. Several thousand died during the course of the war, and the Spanish influenza pandemic that followed. Yet without them, the frontline Allied soldiers would not have had the supplies they needed to continue the fight. During their time away, letters provided a much-needed connection between soldiers at the front and their families back home. During the course of the war, over 12 million letters a week were delivered to soldiers on the Western Front.
My dear mother received her parcel of cake sent on September 17th and was sure pleased to get it. The boys here sure praise your cooking, and I sure agree with them.
There has been a bit of a fuss over Arthur this week. He has been trying to get in the army, unbeknown to his parents. I guess he got in a fine row.
My darling wife. All last night there was a terrific bombardment, by far the heaviest I've heard yet. There was no let-up, and about 4 o'clock it was particularly heavy. Yours, Fred. P.S. How is Mr. Brown? Remember me to them and tell Mrs. Brown that I'm carrying her Belgian coin for luck.
I now hear that Norman has had his arm amputated. A little fellow, H.G. Jones, who was on my staff, has had his leg shot off below the knee, and by some miraculous chance he did not die, and I am told he is so cheery.
When we think of the First World War, we often imagine soldiers trapped for months on end in muddy trenches. But frontline service was only part of their existence. After a few days at the front, soldiers would spend time in reserve trenches or away from the lines altogether. Here they occupied themselves with a variety of activities.
Where it was possible, you had a game of football or cricket or wrestling even. We had a wrestling contest on one occasion. Cards and dominoes, and of course they had the crown and anchor boards in. They weren't really legal, or they were officially frowned on, but you couldn't suppress it under conditions like that.
To help keep up morale, concert parties made up of serving soldiers toured the lines, drawing big crowds.
A fella come in, it's about 11 o'clock in the morning, and he got on this piano and he played. You know, we hadn't seen a civilian or anything like that for weeks. And you know, it sounded beautiful. I'll tell you what he played. Give me your smile, the love light in your eyes. And I don't think I ever heard anything so beautiful in my life. That's how you are when you haven't heard it, you know, when you've been months without hearing any music. That's why I used to try and get these concert parties up, because the men used to get so depressed, you see. But it did sound beautiful. And we stayed half an hour, and that done me a lot of good.
The Third Battle of Ypres opened on the 31st of July 1917. Allied casualties on the first day were heavy, but not nearly as bad as they'd been the year before at the Battle of the Somme, and much more territory was captured. The Allies were learning and adapting. So too was the German army. 0 hour on the 31st was 3:50 a.m. The Allies rose out of their trenches and advanced behind a creeping barrage supported by more than 100 tanks. In places, the attack was very successful. At the northern end of the line, British and French forces advanced quickly and secured the Pilcombe Ridge, winning vital observation points on high ground. But elsewhere, the results were mixed. At the southern end of the line, the Anzacs were among the forces attacking across the Guelevelt Plateau, but a powerful concentration of German artillery ground their attack to a standstill. In the centre, the attack reached as far as the 4th German line. But without support from the south, the centre was left exposed to fire from the Guelevelt Plateau, and counterattacks in the afternoon forced them back, with heavy casualties. The opening day of the Third Battle of Ypres did see some advances for the Allies, but they didn't manage to capture the Guelevelt Plateau. I'm standing on it now. It doesn't look like much, but this is actually commanding high ground with strong German positions. They had to capture this if the British plan was to be a success. On the 10th of August, an attack was launched against the Guelevelt Plateau. Once again, a successful advance was pushed back in the afternoon by heavy German artillery and powerful counterattacks. On the 16th, the second general offensive along the entire front began, known as the Battle of Langemarck, but it followed a now grimly familiar pattern. Progress in the north resulted in the capture of the village of Langemarck, but the Guelevelt Plateau further south still eluded them. It wasn't until September, following the arrival of a new general and new tactics, that things began to improve for the British. General Plumer introduced the idea of a bite-and-hold approach to advances, delivering gains at the Battle of Menin Road, the Battle of Polygon Wood, and the Battle of Broodsinder, eventually capturing the Guelevelt in October 1917. Looking at the images of the Third Battle of Ypres, it's easy to see why mud and blood dominate our views of the First World War. But do those images actually disguise what the British achieved at Ypres? In the final week of October, Canadians launched a series of focused attacks, capturing key positions in the vicinity of Passchendaele. In early November, the Allies took advantage of a break in the weather to press home the advantage, with Canadian forces launching their final attack on the 6th of November. That morning, Passchendaele finally fell. When the British offensive concluded, the British successfully controlled the majority of the high ground around Ypres, and the French had used the respite to recover. Mistakes had been made, but lessons had been learned. The Third Battle of Ypres had forced a new understanding of and approaches to German defensive tactics. While Allied losses were great, that was true on the German side too. 88 divisions, half its strength in France, had been drawn into the battle and experienced a devastating rate of casualties. Passchendaele was a turning point for the Allies, and certainly not a failure, but it's difficult to speak in terms of clear victory or defeat in the face of such massive loss on both sides. It remains a defining moment of the war, with a huge impact on the conflict's legacy in popular culture. The unique horror of such loss is represented here at the Menin Gate, which lists the names of more than 50,000 Commonwealth soldiers who fought in the Ypres salient and whose bodies were simply never found.